Hello and welcome to Vlieseline UK. I'm Laura Strutt from Made Peachy and I'm going to walk you through the process of creating a notebook pen holder. This is a fantastic project for stationery lovers, so you can use it with your diary, a journal, or perhaps even just a book that you want to annotate. Because it's a relatively simple and small make, you'll find that you've probably got a lot of these supplies already in your stash. And once you've mastered the simple construction, you'll better go on and make lots of different custom variations on this design. The supplies you need to make a notebook pen holder are some cotton fabrics. I've got two prints here, one for the main fabric and a second one to make the pocket. We need some wadding. Here I've got the Vlieseline 279 80/20 cotton mix. Of course, you can use any of the Vlieseline waddings for this. So the 276 natural cotton white, the 277 cotton, 278 soya, or the 268 bamboo mix. And I've got some iron-on interfacing. Here I'm using the G700. We also need some elastic. So you're looking for something that's no wider than, say, 1 inch. And some sewing supplies, so rotary cutter, ruler and mat, some scissors, some clips or pins to help with the construction. Because this notebook pen holder is relatively small scale, it's fantastic for using up offcuts of interlinings and waddings. Not only that, because the construction is relatively simple, once you've made one or two and you've got your head around the construction, you can start to shop your stash and use different fabrics and different elements to customize your pen holder. I've prepared the fabrics by cutting two pieces of the main fabric, and I've cut them so that they are 3 inches wide and 8 inches long. And I've also cut a piece of Vlieseline wadding to the same measurements, 3 inches by 8 inches. The fabric for the pocket has been cut again 3 inches wide, and this time we've cut it so it's 10 inches long. I've repeated that, and from the G700 interlining, I've cut 3 inches wide by 10 inches long. I'm first of all going to begin by preparing the pocket. So setting aside the main fabrics for now, I can work on the pocket, and my first task here is to fuse the G700 onto the main fabric. So I have covered the work with the Vlieseline iron-on cloth, and this has been dampened, so the great part about that is it's become transparent, and I can see that as I've put the cloth down, I've not slid the interfacing off of the fabric, so it's exactly where I want it to be. So I've set my iron to hot, so it's 3 dots on the iron, and I'm going to work in a press and lift motion across the whole of the piece. So in doing so, I'm making sure that the iron is in contact with one piece at a time. I'm not causing any ripples. One of the benefits of using the iron-on cloth, because it's a designated cloth used for fusing iron-on interfacings, it means that we get a lovely even distribution of heat, so I'm not going to have any warps or ripples on the finished piece. And because it's dampened, we've got some, you can hear the steam coming there, and that's going to help activate the adhesive. So once I've pressed and held the iron across the surface, making sure all of it's in place, I can simply remove the pressing cloth, so remove the Vlieseline iron-on cloth, and I can turn the work over. And because this is a fusible product, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that on a flat surface, and I'm going to allow that to cool for around about 30 minutes, and that will allow the adhesive to fully bond onto the wrong side of the fabric. Now that my fabrics are all completely cooled and the G700 is securely bonded to the wrong side, I can prepare the pocket. So I'm going to be folding it wrong sides together, and I'm just going to use the tip of the iron just to press in that crease there. Of course, you can recover it with the pressing cloth if you're concerned that perhaps you have any interlining that is overhanging your fabrics and you want to protect the base of your iron. So we can simply place that on top and press and hold. So now I have ironed in a crease here at the top of my pocket. I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and just work a line of top stitching all the way across this section, just to prepare that pocket for placement in the pen holder. So I've worked a line of top stitching here along the top of the pocket. I selected stitch length 3 on my machine and a straight stitch. And we can set that pocket aside and begin constructing the pen holder. So the pen holder, we need to locate the piece of quilt wadding and the 2 pieces of fabric and also our elastic. Now when it comes to trimming the elastic, this is going to be custom made to fit your notebook. So as a general rule, I would suggest selecting your notebook, and you want the elastic to run from the top of the cover to the bottom with round about an inch extra. And that will allow it to wrap around your notebook and hold your pen securely on the front. So I've trimmed my elastic here, it's just under 10 inches. And what I need to do is to position the fabrics ready to construct the pen holder. So I'm going to lay 1 piece of cotton on top of the wadding. And I need to position my elastic centrally at the top and also at the bottom, just making sure all of the raw edges of the fabric are neatly aligned. I'm going to pin that in place, and I can take that over to the sewing machine and just pop a line of stitching at each end, and that's going to hold the elastic in place while we construct the pocket. So over at the sewing machine, I've used a 2.4 stitch size here, and I have worked a line of stitching within that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I've done it at both ends of the elastic, and that's just to hold that into position for when I construct the pen holder. So my next task is to create the pocket front. And to do so, I'm going to position the pocket in place onto the remaining piece of fabric. And then I'm going to, with the elastic folded right out of the way, I'm going to place these right sides together. Having used a straight machine stitch and a 1/4 inch seam, I've worked the whole way round the pen holder, except for a small gap in the seam here, and joined all of those layers together. Before I turn it through, I'm just going to make some small cuts to neaten up my seam allowances. So I like to use sharp scissors, and I'm going to work on the points of the corners. So being really careful not to snip into the stitches, I'm going to just simply cut away the excess on the corners there. So trimming that away. Also, where I'm going to be turning through, I've got quite a lot of bulk on the seam here. Again, this is something that we can trim away. So you can decide whether you just want to trim away the quilt wadding itself or also the fabrics. Again, I like to use very sharp scissors and just carefully work the whole length of the seam to trim away the excess, and that's just going to make everything so much neater when it's turned through. So I'm going to repeat the process and trim away the excess along all of the edges before turning it through. When turning projects through to the right side, we do need to be careful to not pull too hard on these sections, because although we have worked reverse stitching at either side of this gap, it is still going to be quite fragile. So I'm going to use a poker tool or a needle to help me push the corners out. But I'm going to begin by just opening up the section, ensuring that I've got fabric at either side of the opening. And I'm going to take one corner and just begin to roll it through. And I find this process, even if it takes a long time, it's best to do it nice and carefully rolling rather than yanking all of the fabrics through. Just means that you're not putting any extra stress on those stitches there. So carefully rolling everything through to the right side. Carefully just working one piece at a time just to ease the fabrics through. I don't want to force anything and cause any of those stitches to break. You're ready, you can just insert the flat end of a needle or a pokey tool and just help to just push the bulk back through to the right side. And once the majority of it's through, I like to use the tip of a needle or a pokey tool and just slide it along the seams. Now, I'm not pushing too hard because you can still, even though it's not as sharp as a pair of scissors or a needle, it can still rip through the delicate fabrics. So I'm just pushing out those corners and then working along the seam just to make sure everything is rolled directly out to the right side. So same principle, just easing those corners right out. And once all 4 corners are pushed out, I can tuck in the gap along the seam allowance, and I'm going to give it a quick press before I work some hand stitching along this portion just to secure that gap closed. I've pressed the seam allowance along this gap in the opening. I've pressed that all towards the inside, and I've threaded a needle with some cotton, and I'm going to just use tiny discreet stitches, just working on the inside fold of the fabric, just to seal up that gap in the seam allowance to finish the pen holder. And once that's stitched, I can simply snip away the threads. Now that the gap in the seam is closed, I can just slip that onto the front of my notebook and use it to stow some pens and pencils. Once you've made one of the pen holders and you've familiarised yourself with the construction, you can shop your stash and you can use your offcuts of interlinings and waddings and fabrics to make some custom pen holders. So for example, I worked with a thicker notebook here, so I've increased the length of elastic, and I've worked with a larger piece of fabric so that I can make a double pocket design. And again, just working with fabrics from my stash here. This is a clear PVC that I've used for making bags, and I've used that to make a clear front pocket. I hope you enjoy making your own custom notebook pen holders. You can find out more about the Vlieseline products online at vlieseline.com, and you can find us on social media at Vlieseline UK. Please do leave us a comment and tell us about your latest makes. Thank you so much for joining me.